Personen in rechten
La cantante de María 200 ans a perdu 2% de la
rechten Teil an der Nordseite sowie des Außenbereichs
Moving forward.
After young people and workers, let's talk about the mobility of the elderly. Not talking about senior citizens, since you don't like the word, but in the Montreal area. This is a research project that I am conducted with my colleague Sébastien, who could not come here today, unfortunately.
So here we are. So a general presentation, the general background, the objectives, and looking at the conclusions, findings, and the outlook. So we find that when you have an urban response to the mobility needs of the elderly, strengthening existing activities, developing new activities, and how to make pedestrian areas available to senior citizens in the peri-urban context. That is what our approach was all about. So in Canada, an aging population is one of the challenges for urban policies throughout, and in the Montreal area, we're looking mostly at people located in areas that were built in the 50s and 60s. They are former peri-urban territories that are now aging areas in terms of population as well as developments. And if you have three areas around Montreal, on the south, on the Bâle Island south of Montreal. And so you have two types of peri-urban developments, and they are in line with my presentation. You have individual developments that were built next to existing villages, and then you had new territory that is agricultural land that was partitioned up by land developers once that rural agricultural land was urbanized. And so these are areas that have some form of public transportation and some highways. These territories became more dense, but not as dense, as, of course, as the city center. So we tried to draw a picture of, say, the mobility patterns, looking specifically at the peri-urban context and looking specifically at the pedestrian aspect. And so when people walked, which pathways did they use? How did they get from A to B? We looked at areas, at developed areas, where we tried to have a number of criteria to assess the walkability of paths and walkways. And then we had a sort of classification of such areas. And then we looked at the number of miles walked, a number of areas, a number of people concerned per area. And so we had hypermobile senior citizen using a bus or occasionally driving. And so in blue on this slide, you have the public transportation parts, and in green, the bits done on foot. And so you have people going to shopping centers or a few individual shops in the neighborhood. So these people walk a lot, and the person I have in mind here will go out every day to the shopping center, 3 or 4 kilometers a day. And these people are engaged in charity work, in volunteer work, and do walk a lot. Not only do they walk a lot, but they also ride the buses when the distances are too long, or indeed when the weather conditions are not favorable. And on occasion, they will go out to Montreal, but these are specific events. For instance, if people want to go to watch a show or something, attend some sort of event, but otherwise they pretty much stick to their homes. And then you have people with reduced mobility, people who cannot walk very far, are in poor health, and so who have little room for maneuver. And so here we have a person who has an ailing, an ailing person who has a walking ailment, but that person will still try and go out 2 or 3 times a week just to get to stay fit, as it were. And so because that person has fallen quite a few ways, that person has decided to walk on the safer paths. Not that they're very pleasant, but if that person should fall down, then some passerby might help her out. And so this means that the area of activity is located close to home because they can't walk very far, and that person will not walk towards other towns or cities, let alone towards Montreal. And then the third type, you're looking at people who have controlled mobility, in as much as, well, not because the commuting distance is short, but because they know exactly where they can go. They know the paths quite well. So they will walk a lot, they will ride the buses a lot, and so that person, you find lots of green lines on the map, so that means that person does not always take the same path to go from walk from A to B, because she knows the different itineraries, and she knows that certain road crossings are more safe than others, so that person rides the buses a lot, so she's well familiar with the bus network, with the public transportation network. That person goes to Montreal sometimes to go to the theater or to go shopping, goes even further out, further south, if they have something to do. And then having looked at walkability, we decided to see just how different streets rate in terms of walkability. And so we have road crossings, the presence of children, sidewalks, the distance to the street, etc. And you have quite a bit of literature about this as it affects senior citizens. And so we divided up the territory around most of the destinations. So these are marked in black on the map, and we found that most streets in the peri-urban context are minimum safety. So you have basically an uninterrupted sidewalk. I mean, that is these are the basic requirements for such purposes. You have a few exceptions. You have the areas in blue on the map, and so the example we've got here are relative comfort, and so it's not just sidewalks, but you have some buffer area with vegetation. But these areas are rather specific. These are areas where specific repair work was done by the local authorities, just precisely with the view to making these walking areas more user-friendly. And then you have an analysis of the different walkways, precisely so as to ascertain whether, when choosing one road or one path over another, the walkability criterion comes in, makes a difference. And so in our analysis, we were able to find that elderly people do walk a lot. We were rather surprised to find that some people walk as much as 3 or 4 kilometers a day just to go down to the shops. And, well, there's several reasons. A, they want to socialize, to meet other people. Very often, there are 2 of them walking together, but also it's a matter of staying fit. Walking to the shopping center is an excuse. They don't need to buy anything. It's not particularly interesting. It gives them a goal, some place to go to, an excuse to go out for a walk. And lots of younger people, older people are also involved in community work, and that again entails some form of mobility. Also physical mobility, whether walking or indeed driving or even riding the bus. That means a degree of autonomy for senior citizens, and that means that old age is not experienced as negatively as it otherwise would, and so they can come to terms with ailing health. And we find that very often these streets, the safe streets, are more frequented than those with shops on them, even though efforts have been made to have high streets or streets with shops on them, making them more accessible to all to senior citizens. Still, they prefer those streets with buffered areas. And in fact, especially in Montreal, where things can get quite cold in the winter, you have underground shopping malls, which provide, of course, warmth as well as safety. Now, proximity to a shopping mall becomes something of a criterion for old age homes. We have quite a few private residences being built for senior citizens in these peri-urban areas. But then the question is it the case that non-profit charities, as opposed to private retirement homes, do they compete for space in these desirable areas? Now, that's one point. You have people who need to drive to wherever, to drive a lot, but of course, after a certain age, it might become difficult for them to drive. And so the question, how might they do without a car? Can they drive, can they ride a bus, or can they walk to their activities? And we find that in the Montreal area, public transportation is sometimes of the essence, but the next generation of senior citizens, the baby boomers, many of these people have known cars all their lives. They've never used public transportation, and so they're at a late stage in their lives, at a late age, they have to learn all about public transportation. So that's another challenge for them. So we find that the peri-urban territory for a senior citizen is between home and the shopping center. And so the distance between A and B has been revamped to allow for easier driving, but not necessarily easier walking. And so therein might lie another opportunity, looking at the plasticity, the malleability of the territory. If you look at the positioning of parks and schools, maybe other activities can be added in, making areas more accessible, more attractive, more user-friendly for older citizens, and so making it possible, for them to have access to more services, but also making such services economically viable. That means, of course, having the right infrastructure added in as well. And that really means some areas should be made more walkable, especially those areas that would be of use to older or senior citizens. At the end of the day, the real question is, what difference is it going to make to older people? Older people who lose their physical mobility, who lose their autonomy, have to face a new challenge, not just in terms of mobility. People who are mobile are not necessarily people with a car. Very often, these are people who who do not drive any longer, but who are well connected in the community thanks to their community work, to their charity work, to their volunteer work, and so they have kept a good social network that enables them to find rides here and there. Now, of course, we have to adjust our findings, especially in the greater Lyon area. We have a similar study, but we find that looking at these criteria, adjustments can be brought to certain areas. And around Montreal, we found that by looking at the mobility of people living in retirement homes as opposed to older citizens living at home, you can see what difference it makes, and especially when people move out of their homes, what implication does this have on their mobility? Well, thank you very much for this presentation. Francis Boissier, what's your response to all this? And maybe this is your chance to start a discussion with all the participants. Well, yes, my personal response to your presentation, and I certainly do not claim to know everything. Probably I know nothing at all. But having listened to your presentation and having read other art papers about this, if 40 years ago, at the time of urban dissemination or peri-urban sprawl, in Montreal, you're looking about loose suburban areas. Some areas are more dense than others, but still, if back then more care had been given to walking or to bicycle riding, and of course, 40 years ago, riding a bicycle was definitely boring. Now it's only 50% in rural areas. Riding a bicycle now is considered backwards, but in urban areas it's very trendy indeed. But still, if if pathways had been made for cycles as well as pedestrians, I mean, now what it is that the cycling lanes are almost as big as car lanes. I mean, they're very wide, but they are not earmarked for bicycles. But if that had been the case, there would be more people walking, there would be more people cycling. So given the fact that this is what you've got before when you're trying to build sustainable development neighborhoods and all this, what can you do? I mean, you have some areas, and here I'm using standard phrases, but is it the case that now we are deciding, right, let's draw up these cycle lanes, let's draw up these walking lanes, when we're being told that we have to find other forms of transportation? This is not just a matter for the elderly, it's a matter for the young as well, especially people, young students or young children in school age. I mean, of course, if school kids are being driven to school by their parents, there may be a reason. I mean, of course, very often the parents kick the child out of the car, and then when they reach the school and then move on to work, that might be part of the business. But still, the reason you have this type of transportation system is that at the time when roads were laid out, they simply ignored other forms of transportation, namely walking and cycling. Is that right? It is perfectly right, but it's not. It wasn't just a matter of thinking, is that a good or a bad thing? Without being judgmental, we find that the way in which urban design is being conducted now consists in saying, right, we are trying to create a space with mobility, and when the place is no longer good for these people, well, they'll move out. But the people who live there have been living there for the past 30 years. They're not about to move out, even if mobility is something of a challenge. So we can't just say, right, well, if it's not good enough, they'll move out. It won't work like this. What you have to say is, look, these areas will have to be adapted. Future urban or peri-urban territories will have to be designed keeping in mind the fact that people will be staying there to stay, will be staying there in the long run. And we think that if it's good for kids, it's good for everyone. Well, no, some things are acceptable for children, but not acceptable for senior citizens. You have situations, well, for instance, things will not work for senior citizens. In Paris, we have they like cobblestones on street because they're very pretty. We like them for aesthetic reasons, but older people do not like them at all because they're bumpy. They like to have smooth pathways like they get in shopping malls. Also, older people do not want to hitch a ride back home. And so now we have shuttle bus services. But again, older people do not want to take that shuttle bus because they work on fixed schedules. and older people, they used to be autonomous. They used to drive. They lost the driving license. The husband was the one who drove, but now he's dead, so they have to find another mode of transportation, but they won't give up on their autonomy altogether and submit to the restrictions of shuttle buses and such like. Well, it goes to show that decision makers or in local authorities may not include many senior citizens. That may well be the case. And there's another aspect which I found of great interest, and this is to do with the public space at large. We find that there is a societal dimension, the fact that you can walk or cycle to work or to a shopping mall. I mean, you can do this with somebody else, so you get company. But there's also an economic matter, isn't it? Because walking or cycling is also a mode of transportation. I mean, and so they have to be cost effective. It has to make economic sense to walk or to cycle. And when what we've been discussing this morning, we find that public space must be designed in these low density areas where it used to be a road rather than a street, where you had a bus stop or coach stop where people could only if at all catch a bus or catch a coach to the next city, but they couldn't walk, let alone, or they couldn't cycle, let alone walk. And so on this front, not much at all has been done over the past 40 years. I mean, everybody knows about sidewalks, okay, but very often you haven't even got a proper sidewalk. You have a tiny little thing that serves as an excuse for a sidewalk. Even today, it is pathetic. What is being built now is being done in line with what existed back in the 70s or 80s, where the only thing that existed was the car, and the pedestrian had to be protected against himself. And that, I mean, that sort of philosophy governs the decision-making process in urban design. And that goes for architects, that goes for policymakers, and at the end of the day, you end up with the same sort of setup that you had 40 years ago. And in the meantime, what you being said, when you said that you should walk on sidewalks, but I mean, you can't even walk because the sidewalks are too narrow, and yet you get these signs, these posters saying that, oh, you should walk every day, it's good for you, and yet, except for rare exceptions, it is almost impossible to walk or cycle. There's simply no facilities whatsoever.
In Rechten.